Shocking news from Alberta. The new NDP Premier Rachel Notley has appointed a convicted violent criminal to be the Chief of Staff for the Minister of the Environment and the Status of Women. His name is Brent Dancey, and in 1994 he was part of a violent mob that brutally attacked a man on the streets of Regina and sent him in a bloody mess to the hospital. Who is this Brent Dancey, and why is he the Chief of Staff in Alberta? For starters, he's not even an Albertan. As you can tell from his LinkedIn page, his wafer-thin resume, he's a Manitoba boy who most recently served as a fairly junior advisor to the government there about matters involving Manitoba Hydro. What's that got to do with running the Environment Ministry or the Status of Women Ministry in Alberta? His qualifications on their own merits were very thin. But here's the main point. As you can see by this criminal conviction, he was convicted of committing assault causing bodily harm. He was sentenced to 9 months in prison. And in addition to that, the judge was so concerned that he sentenced him to an additional 10-year mandatory prohibition, banning him from possessing firearms or explosives. That would have only expired in the year 2005. Let me tell you what it was like that fateful night in Regina when Brent Dancey and a mob beat a man bloody. I want to quote to you from actual eyewitness statements in court under oath. This is from the preliminary inquiry. I'm going to quote you from the witnesses themselves. Let me start with Lisa Carmen. She testified that the victim was punched, quote, everywhere, in the head and the back, the chest, the stomach. And even when the victim fell to the ground, well, the mob didn't stop. Carmen couldn't even count the number of blows, quote, lots. I felt sorry for him. The victim was trying to cover himself, his head or something. Then the victim tried to stagger into the home. He was actually on the front yard of his own mother's house. He was trying to get in for safety. Well, Brent Dancey wouldn't let him. Here's what witness Carmen told the court. The victim gets up and goes onto the drive, and then the next thing you know, I saw Brent on top of him again. The man was trying to run to safety. Brent Dancey wouldn't let him go to safety. Quote, Brent was like on top of him, and the other guy was, like bent over backwards. Brent was punching him in the head. This is her sworn testimony. Carmen said that the victim looked, quote, bad, bloody, like just full of blood on his face and nose. Well, there was another eyewitness in court that day, Jason Gust. He told the court that Dancey, quote, picked the victim up and threw him on a car and then punched him, quote, in the stomach or on the face. Gust said the victim put up his arms to try to shield his face. Another victim that day was witness that day was a young woman named Kim Johnston. She testified in court that even once the victim was on the ground, he was still, quote, kicked in the head 10, 12, 15 times. Now, there were bystanders to this fight. And one of them was another young woman, and let me quote Kim Johnston. This one woman, quote, was bawling, walking around saying, guys, stop. You guys stop. You guys stop, unquote. Now, others in the mob did stop, but not Brent Dancey. Johnston told the court, quote, I saw blood on the victim's face when he was laying on the ground. I want to quote from just one more witness's testimony. The police were obviously called. This is what Constable Lance Davis testified. He said that the victim's, quote, face was very swollen up. He has bruising around his entire head and his ears. He had a cut over his right eye. It looked pretty severe to me, unquote. That's what Brent Dancey was like that terrible night. Now, he didn't accept responsibility. He didn't show contrition. He didn't plead guilty. He didn't try to make it right. In fact, he did the opposite. As was his legal right, he pled not guilty. He made the government go through an entire preliminary inquiry and then a full trial and then a conviction. He did not show remorse or regret. He did not show accountability, and thus he was sentenced to 9 months in prison and the 10-year prohibition. Well, has he shown remorse or regret more lately? Well, it seems to me that he's trying to cover up his past. He did not disclose it, or if he disclosed it to Rachel Notley, she did not disclose it to the rest of us. It's unthinkable to me that Notley would not have done a criminal records check on people going for high public office, such as chiefs of staff. It's unthinkable to me that she didn't do so. That's a possibility. We've made inquiries with her office. What does it say when the Alberta NDP chooses a convicted criminal to be the chief of staff of an Alberta ministry over every single other Albertan? What does it say when they choose someone with that history of dishonesty and criminality over any other candidate? Don't we need people of high moral caliber to be in decision-making positions? It's especially ironic given that one of the duties of this chief of staff is to supervise programs dealing with violence against women. That's one of his duties. Remember, he works for the Minister of the Status of Women, dealing with violence against women, dealing with murdered and missing Aboriginal women. How can someone who was so violent and merciless to his victim and so lacking in remorse or contrition for so long be the right person for this job? I find it incomprehensible. Well, we put a phone call in to Brent Dancey. We got a voicemail. If I hear back, I'll let you know what he says. We put an email into both him and the Premier's office with other questions too. If I hear back, I'll let you know what they say. But to me, it's part of a pattern. It's a pattern of people who are not the appropriate people being appointed as high officers in Alberta. Remember, 10 out of 12 chiefs of staff in Alberta are not Albertans. But this is far worse than just not knowing Alberta. This is someone who committed a violent crime. I think that's terrible judgment on Rachel Notley's part. You don't have to be a right-winger or a left-winger to see that's wrong. You just have to be someone who wants public integrity. If you, like me, want to stop this, want to undo this, then please sign my petition at firedancey.ca, firedancey.ca. It's important that we have basic standards of integrity in public office. Don't you think? For the Rebel.media, I'm Ezra Levant.